Okay, so before I begin, I want to give everyone a quick warning. These episodes are mostly going to be spoiler-free. However, in the event that spoilers are necessary to support my arguments, I will be telegraphing them in advance and providing ways to skip to a safe section of the video. Please watch carefully because I don't want you to get spoiled. Alright, I'm going to review every single episode of The Wheel of Time, starting now. Hi, I'm Eric. Now, I've been living in a state of both fear and excitement about the existence of this adaptation ever since hearing about it during my first read-through of the series. As I'm sure you've heard from your local hermit who likes to read books that look like the Bible in their spare time, aka me, The Wheel of Time is an unbelievably immersive high fantasy series that means an enormous deal to a lot of people, myself included. Is it flawed? Sure, but the degree to which Robert Jordan and eventually Brandon Sanderson immerse you in this detailed universe and acquaint you with these vividly realized characters is nothing short of spectacular. The series lives firmly in my heart, and the fact that I'm currently living in a world where I get to see a version of it on screen in front of my eyes every Friday night for the foreseeable future is kinda terrifying. So, I need to translate it into some sort of video content that other people can see, so here I am, reviewing The Wheel of Time, screaming into the YouTube void hoping someone will hear me. Now, I think these videos are going to take me a while to make, and they're going to be long because I really care, which is to say, I'm not confident that I'm going to be able to get these out in as timely of a fashion as everyone else will, but damn it, I aim to make up for it in detail. So, before I begin the review proper, I want to go through my criteria and lens in which I'm going to take this project on. So, without further ado, prologue. I swear to God this isn't going to be some fanboy nonsense, so if you're here for that, please go watch something else. So, I want to begin this series by doing the absolute worst thing imaginable and alienating a large section of the audience. First, if you're here because you're looking for someone to dunk on this production because it's not like Game of Thrones, then I suggest you shut this review off right now before I carefully explain to you how much of a fucking idiot you are. While it's true that Shaitan has expressed his interest in capitalizing on a fantasy market by having his next Game of Thrones, the fact of the matter is that The Wheel of Time is fundamentally different than the kinds of fantasy that have been blowing up on TV as of late. It's way lighter, more focused on magic and Dungeons and Dragons style adventuring, and it's not really about tons of political backstabbing and maneuvering, well, at least at first. And then eventually when it gets into that subject matter, it does so in a more different, kind of Joseph Campbell-esque light, which is to say if this show has any chance of succeeding, it needs to do so on its own merits. As a result, I'll be meeting the show on its own terms and discussing how it works as a Wheel of Time adaptation rather than as a marketing exercise for Amazon Prime Video, even if it might be. Damn, look at that billboard. That is a nice billboard. I will be making comparisons to other stories in the sci-fi fantasy genre here, but only when I feel it's necessary for the context of the review. Second, if you're here because you're a book fan who wants to see me prostrate myself to the throne of Robert Jordan and Amazon and go up to bat for every decision made in this adaptation, or every decision made in the original novel because, well, hey, it's the Wheel of Time, then I'm sorry, but you've come to the wrong place. I want to stress again that I deeply love this series, and I stress this because I'm going to be really critical of both this show and the books when I see fit. Every Wheel of Time fan knows that the Wheel of Time isn't perfect, and spoilers, neither is this show. Loving the Wheel of Time is an acceptance that you love something flawed and unruly. But it's okay, Jim. I still love you. I love you and everything you did. And sidebar, while I want to do my best to not bring up comparisons to the books, it's just gonna be unavoidable sometimes. I'm simply too close to the series to not have the original story affect my experience with the show to some degree. So, I'm gonna lay out my rule of adaptation and changes quickly. If you're gonna change something, don't make it worse. If the book legitimately achieves something that the show is trying to achieve in a better way, and if the show could have actually gained something by sticking closer to the source material, I'm gonna bring it up. And last but not least, if you're a Robert Jordan fan who hates every decision that they've made on a base level because the show just isn't like the books, then this isn't going to be for you either, because hey, guess what? I already like some of the changes. Not all of them, but some of them. So yeah, don't expect me to just repeat the phrase, this is bad and it should be more like the books. That being said, Chapter 1, the beginning of this show is bad and should be more like the books. Okay, so I regret to inform everyone that the Wheel of Time series gets off to an extremely poor start. This goes without saying, but the first scene of a story is like pretty spectacularly important. It's your first chance to leave an emotional impression on the audience, and your first chance to, as Brandon Sanderson puts it, promise something to your spectator that should ultimately pay off by the story's end. Now, these things are a bit more complicated in the fantasy genre because there's usually, not always, but usually, a need to explain some kind of crucial element about the world so that the audience can begin the process of being acquainted to the time and space in which the story transpires. But you also gotta balance that with something catchy, something captivating. Now, all that being said, how does Amazon's The Wheel of Time open? Like this.
Many, many years ago, men who were born with great power believed they could cage darkness itself. The arrogance.
The intent of this opening seems pretty clear. The filmmakers want us to understand the main thrust of the narrative right away, so they give it to us in the form of Moiraine monologuing to the audience with the fundamental dynamics of the plot in a macro sense. The world is broken because men who use magic ripped it apart, and the strongest magic man, called the dragon, is about to be born again. The Aes Sedai, aka magic-using women, at least as you can describe them in the purposes of the plot right now, need to get a handle on the dragon right away, lest the world be destroyed. Do we got that? We got that? That's out of the way? We're good? Cool. The problem is that this might work on like a pedantic and expository level, but it doesn't do much to be emotionally investing or visually compelling in the slightest, ultimately suggesting to audiences right out the gate that we should kind of expect a show that's just going to haphazardly tell us things rather than show them. Now, I want to point out here that I don't think this opening is necessarily reflective of the show's overall quality or handling of exposition. Amazon went ahead and released 3 episodes of this in a block at the beginning of the season, and already we've seen some handling of exposition that's much more skillfully handled.
You walk the footsteps of our fathers, trail blazed by our mothers. We bought the land with their blood. Onward go.
It's good to remember Manetheren.
It's just a song. No idea who Manetheren is anyway.
But this is still kind of a lazy way to start your fantasy series, isn't it? Now, I think some will argue that there's very little way to make an expository opening like this work. However, I disagree, and I think the filmmakers could have looked to another film for inspiration, an obscure little indie movie called The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. Now, on a purely narrative perspective, Galadriel is giving a lot of exposition here. But there are some key components at play here that make this scene work on an emotional level. For instance, it opens like this.
The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth.
Notice how the audience is quickly introduced to a tone here, right before we get into the info dump. And then when the info dump happens, it's constantly compared with visually interesting stuff. We get lots of cool looking shots of the rings, dark lords, orcs, a really emotionally fraught scene above a volcano. It's really dynamic, and the audience gets up to speed with the necessary exposition without simply having it being told to us. The Wheel of Time wastes the opportunity to show us anything interesting in its first few seconds. Instead, we get shots of Rosamund Pike's shoulders, her dress, and her just getting ready to go ride a horse. Now, no disrespect to Rosamund's shoulders, they're very good shoulders. I hope that someday mine will look as toned, provided that I start working out and stop reading The Wheel of Time all day. But I would so much rather be looking at stuff surrounding the breaking of the world, or the birth of the dragon, or like anything Moiraine is saying. Now, I'd be a bad Wheel of Time nerd if I didn't mention that this problem is just straight up not present in the original prologue for Eye of the World, which opens with a decidedly more mysterious and terrifying exploration of the breaking from the perspective of the dragon who destroyed it. We don't get a lot of expository information in this, but it's raw and scary and evocative in a way that this section of the show just isn't. But who knows, maybe they just wanted to avoid comparisons to Winter Dragon, which is a money laundering scheme they aired on FX, and like, yeah, this is bad.
I have come for you. I guessed.
Now, despite a generally alarming opening minute, the next scene fares a bit better in terms of showing us something remotely interesting. In it, we see two men, one of whom is presumably able to channel and therefore doomed to go insane, running away from Liandrin and her Aes Sedai sisters, all of the Red Aja. Once cornered, one of the men talks to the other and encourages him to use the power.
We can't die like this. You can fight them. Use it.
And then, in an admittedly nice twist, we discover that the man encouraging the use of the power isn't real, and that the madness has already gripped him. I really like this moment. It immediately and effectively communicates what happens to men who can channel in this universe. They lose their fucking minds. And then Liandrin, aware of the madness, decides to gatekeep the power from him.
This power, it's meant for women.
And then girl boss it away in what looks to be an excruciatingly painful fashion. Poor guy. I like that the Aes Sedai are introduced right away as being potentially cruel and inhospitable to others. The audience now has space throughout this entire story to question their allegiance to the organization of the White Tower, and are given context to the prejudice against Aes Sedai that we're going to see later in the episode. I also just really love Kate Fleetwood as Liandrin. Book readers will likely appreciate just how true to form menacing she is, and non-book readers will get to ask, hey, wait a minute. Isn't this supposed to be one of the good people? Isn't Moraine one of her? But speaking of Moraine, Chapter 2, Moraine Damodred makes weird decisions all of a sudden. Episode 1 of The Wheel of Time changes a lot of Moraine's decisions from the book, despite keeping all the conditions in which those decisions were made roughly the same. The end result is a version of this character who feels a little more rash, impulsive, and surprisingly wrong-headed than her novel counterpart. And the unfortunate thing is I don't think that's intentional on the writer's part. Now, to be clear, none of this is Rosamund Pike's fault. A lot of the promotions, buzz, and reviews mention just how good Rosamund is in the role, and I cannot agree more. She has an obvious reference for Moraine, and imbues this beloved character with charm, humanity, and a kind of regal grace. She's icy when she needs to be, surprisingly warm when she needs to be, and incredibly convincing as a seasoned channeler of the One Power. Seriously, this is a great performance. It's just kind of a shame that the narrative doesn't allow her to be as smart as she could be. Upon arriving at the Two Rivers, Moraine gets an immediate suspicion that the dragon is within their midst. They also get a really strong suspicion that a monster, called the Eyeless, is about to attack, and that they best get a move on finding the dragon. To be clear, there is a time limit and a giant murderous threat that she, unlike in the books, is totally aware of. So she goes to talk to Nynaeve to get information, and that's kind of it. She doesn't keep tabs on anyone, she doesn't really ask anyone else anything. She just kind of talks to Nynaeve and hopes for the best. Then, upon hearing that there are Trollocs in the midst, she makes no attempt to warn the people celebrating directly in the line of fire, and instead informs Lan that she isn't quite sure who the dragon is, which is a bit of an odd point, because if there's 4 Ta'Viren, by the logic of this universe, she should be able to feel their pull, but okay, let's just give her the benefit of the doubt and say that she has no idea and that she can't feel anything. So as a result, she knowingly risks the lives of everybody celebrating Beltane, including the Dragon Reborn, and doesn't warn anybody of the Trolloc attack that she and Lan are fully aware is about to happen. But, luckily, the dragon makes it out of the fight on Winter Night. Moraine gets injured, but it looks like she can still hold out a bit. Rand accuses her of bringing Trollocs to the Two Rivers because of his anti-Aes Sedai sentiments, and she responds by doing this.
The dragon has been born again. And it's one of you.
Okay, so I'm going to give book readers a second to recover from the stroke they just had, and give non-book readers a second to click to a new section of the video if they haven't made it to episode 3 yet. I have to explain how wrong I think this is, but I can't do that without giving away a major spoiler in that episode. So, if you've only seen episode 1 of The Wheel of Time so far, click here to skip the spoiler. You've been warned. 3, 2, 1... Okay, so one of the things you learn early on in the books, and that you learn in episode 3 of the show, is that this world is riddled by people called Dark Friends. Dark Friends are normal people with an allegiance to the Shadow, and these people are everywhere, in every village, every city, and across all levels of control and government. As a result, if you do not serve the Dark, and you're on a very important mission, say, finding the Dragon Reborn in an effort to stop the Dark One from leaving his prison, you should probably be really, really careful about announcing who the dragon might be, in an effort to keep from putting a giant target on their backs. Now, bearing all that in mind, what is wrong with this scene?
The dragon has been born again. And it's one of you.
Okay, I have to sneak out and record this part here because for some reason my audio equipment is giving me issues and I can't record this part of the video normally. But anyways, the reason why I have a problem with this is that if Maureen just announces you're the Dragon Reborn to one of these kids who may have already been corrupted by the Shadow and therefore could be a dark friend, all she's really doing is playing into the hands of the very dark one that she is trying to defeat. She is absolutely jeopardizing the safety of the dragon and therefore the safety of her mission.
This is a baffling oversight in the construction of this character. And I'm just bothered. That being said, it's not all bad. I really like the moments where Moiraine gets to interact with these characters outside of the needs of the plot. Her warmth in the face of hostility upon arriving at the Winespring Inn is great, suggesting that she feels above the experiences and prejudices that the room places on her just for being an Aes Sedai. I also like this moment here, where she tries to form a kind of connection with Nynaeve while also trying to get information out of her. And this moment with her and Lan in the bath is, so good. It's funny and charming in a way that doesn't resort to Marvel-esque quipping and communicates the intimate bond that these two have together. I like that there's nothing sexual happening here. It's just two people who share a consciousness in the hot tub 5 feet apart because they're not fucking. They get to enjoy this really quiet, nice moment together before...
You think it's one of them?
They have to get back to work. Now, these quiet moments are ones that are often shared by the main Emond's Field 5 that we also get introduced in this episode, which leads me to my next section, Chapter 3, all the main characters are precious, beautiful beings and I want to protect them at all costs. I love the main cast of this show very, very much. In most cases, their constructions are pretty faithful and reverent to the characters I love, and in one case, the construction is even better. There is an exception to this statement, and we'll get there, but I'd really like to go through everybody in the order that they were introduced and talk about why I like these people. First, we get to meet Nynaeve and Egwene. Nynaeve is the village wisdom, a term which here means caretaker, healer, and borderline meteorologist of the Two Rivers. And we meet Egwene, the daughter of the town's mayor and Nynaeve's potential future apprentice. Now, both of these characters have a bit of a legacy in the series, as is foreshadowed by Egwene Jesus posing in the water. But beyond that, we're meant to connect to these characters based on a warm and lovely bond that they share straight away. In fact, you can make an argument that in the series, a lot of the women of the Two Rivers have this kind of bond. This scene where Egwene gets her braid and is invited to be part of the women's circle of the Two Rivers is really, really nice. I like that, despite the formality of the occasion, you can see that these characters can't stop smiling, like they're really proud of her for making it to such a sacred thing. I like that Nynaeve comforts Egwene before tossing her into the river, and then Egwene gets to feel really accomplished that she made it through such an intimidating and superhuman task. It's a shorthand way to get us quickly endeared to these characters before the narrative takes off properly. I think it goes over really well, and the women's scenes after this are great too. We learn that Nynaeve is actually really protective of her townsfolk. She stands up and demands that Lan announce himself when he walks into the Winespring Inn, and even comes down on the entire White Tower for not being accepting of the woman that raised her, to Moraine's face. This is a big deal because while it's true that Aes Sedai cannot harm another, except for out of self-defense or in the act of gentling a man, a lot of audiences aren't necessarily going to know that at this point of the series. As a result, Nynaeve comes out looking super brave right out the gate. She's stubborn in her convictions, but she's also deeply caring towards her own people. I'm waiting for Zoe Robbins to have more loud, cranky, Nynaeve-esque moments as they constitute some of my favorite scenes in the entire series, but this is a nice start so far. Egwene also gets a lot of great material to work with. First, her romance with Rand is pretty great. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about these characters being aged up, but now that I see it, I don't really mind. They're both old enough to express themselves sexually, and it heightens the chemistry between both characters, making their relationship feel way more believable than it does even on the onset of the books. Egwene and Rand have obviously been in a relationship for a long time, and everything about it feels real. As a result, when this scene hits...
Nynaeve. She asked me to become her apprentice.
Really?
She thinks I'll be able to listen to the wind if I work with her.
It's a lonely life. Getting your wisdom.
It's super emotional, right? I also love how this complication in their romance foreshadows this story's eventual interest in the pain of obligation. Egwene knows she has a gift. She, along with Nynaeve, can listen to the wind. And at a certain point, she knows that she has a role to fulfill to maintain the best interest of her entire community. She has to become the wisdom. Romantic whimsies be damned. Duty is, indeed, heavier than a mountain. And both her and Rand understand this, and it breaks their hearts. And speaking of Rand, woo! Yosha Stradowski, my guy. I cannot commend the casting of this part enough, because the depiction of Rand is absolutely spot fucking on for what it should be for this character to work in the long run. He's really charming. Way more charming than he is in the first book, but he's already prone to self-deprecation and possessing something of a quiet dark side. Generally speaking, Rand is a good boy who likes to drink with his friends, he's stressed out about his relationship with his girlfriend, and he gets an opportunity to mourn his long-lost mother. But he's also incredibly moody. Not to skip ahead episodes, but I really love this moment from episode 2 because it communicates Rand's darkness and internal struggle quite nicely and quietly. Rand also has a serious aversion to Aes Sedai.
She looks like a normal person. I don't know. Quiet. Who knows what she can hear?
He's legitimately bigoted against them, making off-colored comments about Moraine's supernatural hearing abilities and accusing her of bringing Trollocs to this quiet little town based only on age-old stereotypes, predicated on a general mistrust of Aes Sedai that gets casually tossed around a lot in this world. I like that this show isn't afraid to get into this side of him early on. Rand is charming and likable, and we want to root for him, but his darkness is also pronounced in a really realistic light. Eventually, because of the laws of drama, he's going to have to confront this darkness, but as of now, it's just really well set up. And now, for the best and worst of the main cast, we have Mat and Perrin. I love what they're doing with Mat here. His opening scene where he loses at dice that's funny, is a perfectly charming and pathetic introduction to a character that nobody in this town takes seriously. On top of that, the writers of the show make a really bold decision to transform Natty and Abel Coffin from helicopter parent and respected horse trader to broken, abusive, and potentially substance-addicted figures in Mat's life. I am all in on this change, specifically because it adds a lot to Mat's character. Now, in order to explain this point in further detail, I kinda have to give a general overview of Mat's arc, but I won't spoil any of the specifics. If you're worried about spoilers, please skip to this part. Giving some time, making sure you get the chance to skip, and let's go. So one of the defining aspects of Mat in the books is that he does not view himself as a hero. Mat thinks of himself as a bit of a scoundrel. He's a gambling, womanizing bar rat who likes to spend a great deal of these early novels trying to get away from the heroics that surround him and unwilling to grant himself the satisfaction of being a hero whenever he does something genuinely good for others, which is often. What I love about making Mat come from a broken home is that we get to see this opinion of himself in its genesis. Mat's mom views him as a prick, just like his father. And what's becoming clear, especially in later episodes, that Mat holds this opinion of himself as well. When he does something good, like being there for his sisters when his mom absolutely can't, it's not out of any form of heroism. Instead, he has a moral obligation to do right by them. Doing the right thing to Mat does not constitute being a hero. It's just something that he has to do. Which is funny because if BoJack Horseman has taught me anything...
Well, do you? Think I'm a good person? Deep down?
That's the thing. I don't think I believe in deep down. I kind of think all you are is just the things that you do.
Well, that's depressing.
This version of Matt is the character stripped down to his barest essentials, and it's clear to me that the decisions being made here are in service of heightening a character who really deserves the heightening. Now, Perrin, on the other hand... Oh boy. Once again, I want to stress that this is no fault of the actor Marcus Rutherford, who is spot on in the role. He's got that quiet, rugged charm that Perrin needs, and you can tell that despite his gruff exterior, he's a softie with a heart of gold. It's a really nice performance, and I hate the fact that it feels compromised by this stupid subplot of him having a wife that they just immediately fridge, and okay, I'm gonna stop, I'm just gonna stay calm. Now, I understand why this was done, because Perrin's introduction in the book is admittedly pretty weak. There isn't much other than obligation propelling him through the narrative at this point, and while things get interesting once the wolves are eventually introduced, I personally found that he blended into the main cast without much of a definitive personality. We do know that he's really big, and that he really needs to be careful when he walks around rooms, so as to not break stuff or cause harm to others, and that's always been a part of him. So the show probably made a good call in giving him something to supplement his character, but did they really have to do this? So Perrin has a wife now. Her name is Layla. I know this because every time her name comes up, I'm almost taken aback by how copy and pasted into the story she seems.
Those monsters killed Nynaeve and Layla and half the people we've ever loved.
Layla works at the Forge, but she doesn't say or do anything of substance throughout this entire episode, and then when Perrin accidentally swings an axe into her stomach, she's dead. Now that she's dead, Perrin gets to be all sad and think about how he needs to be more careful and reflect on his repressed bloodlust 9 full books away from Crossroads of Twilight. Now, I want to talk about the term fridging for a second. For those unfamiliar, fridging refers to a really sexist trope where women, often superpowered women, are depowered, killed, assaulted in order to advance the quote-unquote more important male character's arc. What I don't like about this trope is that it reduces the agency of women in stories to objects that must be disposed of in order to advance the arc of their male counterparts. And they did it anyways. And you know what's worse than them relying on a sexist trope? They're not even doing it well. If you're really gonna do this, you could, make an attempt to make us care about Layla, but they really don't. For context, here's a supercut of everything Layla says before she dies.
I know.
Wow. Good job. By not exploring this character with any depth, or endowing her with a single scrap of humanity beyond her position as Perrin's wife, the audience can't bring themselves to care about her, and thus, Perrin's mourning of her in subsequent episodes doesn't hit as hard as it should. Days Conger had more lines than Layla does.
No, you drink with us tonight. Miranda, drink the Adorka! Real feast! Come and get some of this!
And you know what? Since we're circling around it, let's talk about the last major thing in this episode that I want to talk about before we get into some general scattered thoughts. Chapter 3. Everybody was winter nighting! Okay, so Winter Night. It's a scene we've been getting teases of for a really long time now. It's a scene that book fans were really looking forward to seeing. And it's alright. Not great, but alright. Like much of this show, it's clear that they're going for something a little different than the books in this moment. Whereas everything about Winter Night and its lead-up in the Eye of the World is creepy, tense, and contained, culminating in an explosion of violence centralized entirely in Rand's home, the attack on the two rivers in the show is more of a sustained and constant assault by a large army of Trollocs. Now, in theory, this is a good idea, as it gives everyone in the main cast a little chance to shine.
Where are the girls?
They were right here, guys.
Where are the girls? Hey! Over here!
The problem is that the action, while filmed in a way that makes sense, never quite feels as visceral as it should. The use of this kind of low frame rate, shaky cam cinematography communicates the feeling of restlessness and scattered confusion quite nicely, but it kinda gave me a headache after a while. The blood splatters of the Trollocs are mostly digital and don't really match the wet puppet aesthetic that they went for in the creature designs. The CGI, while certainly not terrible, feels just a bit cheap. Hey Jeff, maybe if you spent some money on this show and not that fucking jet engine, we could have gotten better effects. And the buildup of this Trolloc who breaks into Rand's house is just really weak. Where's the tension here? There's no real sense of impending doom, no building of fear before the scariest goddamn thing in your life busts through the front door. Wouldn't it be cool if they did like a Jurassic Park thing here? Like we could hear something coming closer and closer, and then like milk the moment for everything that it's worth, and then give us a real money shot, nice and close, of that Trolloc just busting in, but I don't know, the way that they did it is just kind of lazy filmmaking to me. However, if the worst thing I can say about episode 1 is that it needs a budget increase and that the action needs to be as good as the moment-to-moment character stuff, then, well, you know what? I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about this series as a whole. The Wheel of Time has always been more about the interpersonal workings of these characters. A lot of new readers tend to feel off-put with how uneventful these books are, and it's not that they're uneventful, it's more that they're concerned with conversations, character building, understanding the world that you're in more. So as long as the show chooses to focus its time on these moments prominently, while eventually improving stuff like this, then I'm pretty confident we're going to be in decent shape when they try to tackle Dumai's Wells. Please don't mess up Dumai's Wells, Rafe. Please, Rafe. Bestie. I'm begging you. Please don't mess it up. So anyways, those are the more organized and specific thoughts, but now I want to cut away to a few quick bits and bobs and things I want to say, both positive and negative, in a segment I'm going to call Chapter 4, Loose Threads of the Pattern. I'm just going to go in point form here. First, I like that the show is in color. By choosing a color palette that's way more vibrant than what we're used to seeing in genre shows like this, The Wheel of Time is able to distinguish itself visually from other programs of its kind, and accentuate the importance of color as a defining aspect for the Aes Sedai in future episodes. Michael McElhatton, he is absolutely stone cold perfect as Tam al'Thor. This is a character who lives rent-free in my heart, and I'm already super excited about the way that he's being portrayed. Same goes for Johan Myers, who plays Padon Fane. Without spoilers, I really can't wait to see how this already captivating performer will bring Fane to life. It also bears mentioning that this sketchy relationship he has with Matt is, so good. I don't like the fact that they've replaced the curses with normal swear words. I get that this might be off-putting for people who aren't nerds and who don't say blood and bloody ashes all the time, but it flattens the dialogue of the show and makes the actual universe feel way more generic than it really is. This shot of the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai, it's pretty freaky. I like it. I also really like this shot.
1,000 wars have washed over the lands down mountain, and Two Rivers folk don't have any more need to pay attention now than before. War is just fools killing other fools for foolish causes.
Aes Sedai don't fight wars. They pull the strings of the world from the White Tower. And if one of them's here...
Then she'll enjoy bell time tomorrow like the rest of us.
Notice how the flow of conversation is depicted visually within the Winespring Inn, tracking how a disavowal of war transitions to a petty comment about the Aes Sedai, and then immediately dismissed by a comment made by someone who has obviously never left the village. This is pure Robert Jordan done on film, and I am here for it. And finally, hearing Rosamund Pike read the novel's usual preamble at the end of this episode is just, chills, man. Total chills. Chapter 5. There are no rocky beginnings to the turning of the Wheel of Time, but it is a rocky beginning. While I have a lot of positives to say about this episode, and reviewing it in depth has revealed much to appreciate, I'm admittedly happy that Amazon released it alongside 2 better episodes. To be honest with you, if my opinion of this entire series were based entirely just on episode 1, I don't think I'd be very excited. However, while this Wheel of Time adaptation is certainly getting off to a rocky start, and I'm not a fan of a number of the decisions they've made, I do think there's enough promise from both the main cast and these writers to warrant some enthusiasm going into episode 2. Overall, I'd give this one a solid 6 out of 10. And that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. I'm gonna try to review these episodes as fast as possible, but as you can tell, these videos are going to take time, and I need to assure that they have the attention that they deserve. Please, though, leave a like, subscribe, tell me what you thought of this episode and the video. I really want to work through, like, kinks and general structure things. And please, feel free to share this episode. I really want to grow along with this community, because the Wheel of Time people have given me so much, and this is my way of kind of giving back. Thank you, and may you always find water and shade.